I'm Michael Bell, back with you with the CVB Challenge, the Christ Verse per Book Challenge. We are looking at each of the 66 books of the Bible and showing how Christ is the center of each of those books. And of course, therefore, of the entire Bible. Now, we've reached Obadiah, a one-chapter minor prophet book. And in verse 17, we have an example of how Christ really underlies this particular passage and infuses it with messianic meaning. So here's what we need to understand. It says, "But in Mount Zion, there will be those who escape." Mount Zion being the seat where Messiah will be enthroned. He's going to rule from Jerusalem, from Mount Zion, and there be the Messiah. From there exercise his reign as the one who rules over the whole earth and really over the whole universe as Lord of Lords and as King of Kings. Now here's what's going on. Obadiah condemns the actions of the Edomites, especially their attitude. Who are the Edomites? Well, when Esau sold his birthright to Jacob, his name was changed to Edom, or at least his nickname, bread stuff. And so later on, he and his descendants then will move across the Dead Sea, beyond the Red Sea, a little bit south and a little bit east, to a place called Seir, S-E-I-R. And so his land can be called Seir in the Bible. Sometimes it's called Esau. Sometimes it's called Edom. And there's a special mountain there that was their highest peak that corresponded to Israel's Zion, the peak of Jerusalem. And so there's this comparison between Mount Esau and Mount Zion. Now here's what happened. As the Chaldeans, and their capital city was Babylon, invade Judah under Nebuchadnezzar, they do so in three waves, in 605 BC and 597 BC, and then finally in 586 BC, they devastate that city. They knock down its walls, they burn down the temple, they loot the temple of its valuables, and they take captives with them back to Babylon. And what Edom had to do with that was simply to be a bystander and applaud those actions. Now, they may have been accomplices in a minor way, but they certainly weren't responsible for the success of that campaign. It was in simply applauding this and cheering on the Babylonians that they incur condemnation from God. And here's some of the language then in this minor prophet. Verse 11, "On the day that you stood aloof, on the day that strangers carried off his wealth, Israel's wealth or Judah's wealth, and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. But do not gloat over the day of your brother in the day of his misfortune. Do not rejoice over the people of Judah in the day of their ruin. Do not boast in the day of distress. Do not enter the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Do not gloat over his disaster in the day of his calamity. Do not loot his wealth in the day of his calamity. Do not stand at the crossroads to cut off his fugitives. Do not hand over his survivors in the day of distress." And so these verses lead us to believe that Edom may have had a minor role, perhaps going in after the fact and looting, or perhaps making it so that certain fugitives that had escaped from the hands of the Babylonians were then captured and returned to the Babylonians, this kind of thing. But their main sin is to be in favor of what the Chaldeans, what the Babylonians are doing. This is their sister nation, and yet they gloat over her calamity. They are happy that she's been defeated and been devastated. In Psalm 137, now this is coming from the point of view of Judah, it says, "Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem, how they said, lay it bare to its foundations." Psalm 137:7. Because ironically enough, by the Edomites desiring the destruction of Zion, they desire the destruction of all people, because only from Zion is there salvation, not only for Judah, but also for Edom and for Egypt and even for the Chaldeans. If anyone's to be saved, if anyone's to escape condemnation and judgment, it's going to be through Zion, through the King who reigns from Zion, Jesus Christ of Nazareth. So in a very strange way, they're desiring their own demise, because by wishing for the destruction of Zion, they would destroy the source of all salvation. And it's very clear that Mount Esau cannot save, in contrast to Mount Zion. So this underscores the importance of us being for the right things. It's not only about what we do, the things that we practice, which are incredibly important, but also who we applaud, who we cheer on. Are we cheering on the good guys and the acts of righteousness? Or do we sometimes cheer on acts of wickedness? And this is what Paul teaches even in Romans 1, where he describes idolatry and sexual sin and all kinds of things. He says, they know that God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die. This is the final verse in Romans 1. They not only do them, okay, and practicing these things does lead to condemnation, but give approval to those who practice them. And that's what the Edomites are guilty of. They're just as guilty in God's eyes as the Chaldeans, the Babylonians themselves, who destroyed Jerusalem because they wanted Jerusalem to be destroyed, and they cheered on the ones who destroyed Jerusalem in their ignorance, attacking not a city, not an ordinary city by any means, but the capital city of the one and only Savior, the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Now, Jesus is on every page of the Bible. Shouldn't he be on every page of your life and mine?